It was a summer expedition to the Antarctic Peninsula, December 22 through to February 23. And it was advertised but by or run both by the ASC and the ESC. The original trip was scheduled a couple of years earlier, and then due to COVID was delayed once and delayed twice, and eventually we got away just under a year ago, which was really great news. We got together in North Wales. Phil Wickens, who's at the bottom of the ladder there, he's the one that organised the trip. Frederick was one of the other guys. He'd come over from Holland for this weekend, and those are my feet there. Everybody made this weekend planning trip except for Ian. He used the excuse that he lives in Australia and it was too far to come for a weekend. I don't know what people get up to these days with excuses. And so the main thing we wanted to cover was safety, especially around crevasses. There are some big crevasses down in Antarctica, and we wanted to go through. We have to self-rescue. We had no choice. Somebody went in a crevasse, we were going to have to self-rescue. There is no other option. So that was sort of the primary thing, but the rest of it was meet each other and understand what the trip was all about. And anyway, as a result of that, well, I drew up some objectives, and the first one is up there, and it's a stipulation for my wife. She says, Steve, if you don't come back, you won't be allowed to go again. So I kind of like to keep her happy. Next one is to avoid going to hospital. I do a few triathlons, and I have ended up in hospital at the end of one, and I always put that now as one of my objectives. No international incidences. We tried hard with this. When we landed in Buenos Aires airport, one of the guys, I think it was Rodney, was asked by the customs official at the immigration. He said, "Sir, who does own the Malvinas?" The Malvinas Islands, and Rodney wasn't really quite sure how to answer this, as I wouldn't have been either. And he coughed and spluttered and sort of said, "Well, I suppose we do." Anyway, after a few minutes, once he had his thumbprints done and his lots of bits of paper stamped, the guy with a very friendly face smiled at him, handed his passport back, and said, "Enjoy your stay in Argentina." The Argentinians have certainly got a great sense of humor, but also yeah, it was kind of a good start, and luckily that was the worst we had on the whole trip. The next point there, which is to explore the Antarctic Peninsula primarily on ski, and to try and climb some unclimbed peaks, and there's a few of the ones we were aiming for are written down there. This was the main goal of the expedition. And so we'll talk about that. Well, as the talk goes on, we'll see what happens. With that. The weather can be a little bit grey, cloud base can be low, and therefore the boat that we were sailing down there on had some kayaks on, so there was a good opportunity to do a bit of kayaking. There's plenty of wildlife down there, great continent, and from my perspective, it's the first time I've ever been on a boat with a sail on it in my life. So for me, it's a little bit of an opportunity to learn to sail. Right, this is a map which has got lots of stuff on it. Let's start off in the lower right-hand corner. There's Antarctica sitting down there on the bottom of the Earth, from where we sit in the Northern Hemisphere anyway. And the Antarctic Peninsula is this bit that juts up here. So we are heading for that. This is another view of the Antarctic Peninsula, and we're heading to basically tuck in behind some of these islands here, and then climb peaks along along the ridge. This is where we're aiming for. Other parts of the map there's Elephant Island, and there's South Georgia. So we can now see the distance that Frank Wolseley navigated James Caird on the Shackleton expedition, a wee boat, which is, and when you go down there, you suddenly realize I've always been in awe of what he did, and this puts it into a whole different perspective. We're going to set off from the Beagle Channel, which is roughly the border between Chile and Argentina. Chile's round to the south here, Argentina's to the north. So we're going to start in the Beagle Channel, just around about the end of the pointer there, at a place called Ushuaia. And we're going to sail around Cape Horn, across the Southern Ocean, down towards Antarctica. Got the Falkland Islands on there just for reference. And what I've done is I've put a map of the UK, but transplanted from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere. So you can see that roughly the Lake District is a similar distance north as to where we're starting south. And as you see from some of the pictures, the weather and the climate in the Lake District is really quite different, even though its relative latitude should have a similar climate. And we're down there in the summer as well. I actually spent a few days down in Ushuaia after the trip, and I'm just going to cover a couple of those slides before we kick off now. I did go to the War Memorial, very poignant place to go to, obviously the Argentinian version of it. I also, the day after we got back, I climbed a wee peak just above Ushuaia. This is Ushuaia below us. And you can see this is the main international runway, and the marina is just in here. So the boat we're sailing on is just tucked away in the harbour here. On the top of the hill here, there's myself to the right, and Paul and Rodney, who were two of the other members of the trip. This was I walked up this. I think it's called the Esmeralda Valley, and came up to this lake called it's actually Lake Blanco, which is obviously a white lake, and there's a glacier. We're now just about 1,000 meters at about the same position where the Lake District is, and we've got a full scale glacier up there. So it just gives you an idea. The climate down there is a lot cooler than we get in the northern hemisphere. I'm not a meteorologist. I'm guessing it's all to do with the Gulf Stream. So if the Gulf Stream switches off, this is what we can expect maybe in the UK and in Scotland. If you ever end up in a discussion with an Argentinian and the discussion turns towards the Falkland Islands, I always found that to remind them that they just won the World Cup and that they were the finest football team in the world was an excellent way of diffusing the situation and discussing something that really put a massive smile on their face. So anyway, some great bars and great memories there. Okay, back to our trip. This was Ollie to the left. He's the skipper of the boat that we hired, and he was giving us a safety brief on what to do with all the various bits of string and rope that were there to help operate the vessel. There's Ian. He's the guy that came from Australia. Liam, who was Canadian but living in London at the time. Frederick, who was from the Netherlands, and Rodney, who was from London. We'll see the other people. And I think that's probably what's left of the Argentinian Navy in the background there as well. Anyway, we got stuck in Ushuaia for a few days, about 3 days, because the weather was far from ideal to head out in a wee boat into the Southern Ocean. And you can see that, and this is a protected harbour, and we were getting, it was a wee bit choppy just sitting in there. This is Ushuaia, sits mostly along the coast there, and then this is a glacier just above the city, which I went up later on. A really nice walk. You can walk right from the city. So we were waiting on weather for a few days. We had one thing that was preoccupying us, which was British Airways had decided that they took a shining to my ski bag, Rodney's ski bag, and Paul's ski bag, all three of us who flew down with them. So we spent a lot of time trying to chase these things up, and we had to come up with a contingency plan in terms of what we were going to do should our skis and other kit not turn up. So we did find a couple of good shops where we could get stuff from, but we didn't want to buy this until the last minute, just in case that all our stuff did arrive. So this is a picture of, we'd have a daily briefing from Ollie on the vessel. So we're now in the top cabin on the boat, which is fully enclosed, and we'll see why that's kind of a nice position to be in as later on as we start sailing. I didn't take this picture with the intention of actually showing it, so there's a bit of glare on the screen, unfortunately, but you might better work out we've got the southern tip of South America coming down here, and we've got the Antarctica Peninsula sitting up here, and here there's a low pressure, and he's showing basically that this low pressure is what we're going to use to blow ourselves, use the sails as much as possible to blow ourselves in the right direction. But it wasn't coming in for another couple of days, so I was watching that. And just for those around, yes, low pressures in the southern hemisphere, they go clockwise, so you have to be a little bit on your toes there as well. The boat was the inside of it, the cabin area was easily accessible at all times. But in the back of the boat, there was a thing that they called the garage, and this is the garage which would be sealed off for the sailing across the Southern Ocean. And in here, we keep things like the skis are in there, any excess bags, there's dry suits for the kayaks, all the stuff that we don't need for the crossing will be sealed up in here and can be accessed once we get down to Antarctica. This is Ollie's better side, some people might say. Some people may say not his better side, but there he is packing the thing up. The other end of the boat, the pointy end, there's another similar locker. And this was called the larder, and sorry, the supermarket, and the supermarket held the larder. So all our fruit and vegetables were kept in there. Again, we wouldn't be able to access that during the crossing, so we needed to get all the food that we would need for the crossing, which, judging by the way my guts behaved, wasn't very much, but we needed to get all that food inside the cabin because we wouldn't be able to get it during the actual crossing itself. And that's Frederick. He was just getting some stuff out at the time. While we were waiting, this was just in the harbour, in the marine harbour area, and this is Sammy the seal. He's a wild animal, could be very dangerous indeed. He was just pottering around. He was actually on the lookout for cars that had just come back from a little drive around, because the bonnets of all the cars were very warm, and he'd literally pull himself up on the car, have a little sleep on the bonnet, on the warm bonnet, and then move on to the next warm spot. And then you'll see in the background that bad weather that had really brought some snow down to about 600 or 700 meters. This is the middle of summer. So it's just, yeah, it was a wee bit of a different climate to what we're used to. Here's our boat, Iceberg. Lena, who's from Poland, she's the first mate. Ian again and Liam again. You can see the enclosed cabin, which is kind of nice. Those of you that are into sailing, the vessel's got a thing called an aeromast on it. And what that means is that the whole of the mast and the bits that hold the sails fore and aft, they're all one solid piece. So the whole thing rotates in the boat. And the great thing about that is you can then take a rope, which was called the mainsail, attach the back here, go through some pulleys, and this came to the rear of the cabin here. Which meant that the number of times you'd have to go forward to adjust the sails was reduced quite dramatically. You can make changes just by popping out the back and operating where that was, and basically help steer the vessel, or make sure that the sails were pointing in the right direction for what you wanted to do. Sorry if there's any marine people out there. My terminology is a long way from ideal. Okay, so the vessel's a little unusual, and for this sort of purpose, it's got a lot of benefits. Anyway, eventually, after 3 days waiting in Ushuaia, yes, we did sail. Yes, we were accompanied by some great marine life. And no, we didn't have all our skis and our kit and our crevasse rescue stuff. We had managed to either buy locally. We managed to buy some kit off a some French people who were leaving, having just been down here doing the same thing. I know Rodney and Paul did that at great expense, and I managed to borrow off Ollie some stuff. So we were a little bit short of kit, and the kit we did have wasn't the stuff that we'd fully prepared and trained with. Not ideal, but hey, that was, you know, that was part of the reality. So off down the Beagle Channel. Still a bit choppy, but we knew that once we got out into the open sea that the winds were supposed to drop and become quite favourable. The next picture I've got here, this is our GPS tracking. So this is Cape of Good Horn, and this is us sitting here. And we've now gone out of the around the Cape, gone through some quite choppy water. I really noticed that as the depth of the seabed varied, that's where some of the choppiest seas were, and that's I got the prize for being the first person to bring my stomach up, and I think most other people followed me, but by then I was actually, by this point at least, I was able to get up and take some pictures. And there we are, sailing roughly due south. Regarding the seasickness, people had different ideas. Rodney had these glasses given to him, I think by his daughters, for his Christmas present. I think they were, I'm not sure they get 5 stars on Amazon for anything other than a fashion accessory. most of us were using patches, seasickness tablets, and the guys that were on ginger seemed to do not too bad. Whichever way it was pretty tough to stave it off fully. Right, let's just look at a few things on the boat. This is our galley. So the galley has got it's got this orange hose is actually seawater, because we're not carrying a huge amount of fresh water on board. So the fresh water comes out of a regular tap, but a lot of our water supplies would come from the orange hose. Great way of washing out your mouth in salt water to make you feel a little better after you've been ill. Certainly was, well, I thought tasted better. The wee window, we're pretty much underwater and from the wind in this direction, and you can see from the gimbaled cooker here that we're banked over a wee bitty. So that's the galley. We would all chip in, do a bit of cooking each. There was a bread maker on board. I learned how to make bread, not very successfully, but I did. So it's always something new to learn. This was the bunk room that three of us were in. So this was my bunk here. Liam was it was just next door, and Phil upstairs. We've got all these netting. Basically, you tighten these up in the rougher seas to make sure you stay in your own bunk. If you look vertically above us, above the bed, that was the emergency exit. Not really designed, definitely discriminated against rotund people. I could certainly get through it, but it was a fairly tight fit. So the next thing is, and hopefully this is going to work sound wise, just a short video of sailing across the water. Whenever we were outdoors, we'd keep ourselves leashed onto points on the boat. So there's Ian untying himself. Go overboard there if you're not leashed on. It's guaranteed to be, but you're probably not going to survive it. The boat didn't go over all the waves, but it was it was good fun actually, and fairly exciting once the stomach settled down a bit. And eventually we go. This is down into the Antarctica there.
Where if it flips and you're in that pool, you're now upside down in that pool. Yeah.
So that was Ollie just giving us a bit of a safety brief to say that these icebergs look very friendly, but if you go along and you land on one and it does flip over, you're going to be in big trouble. You're probably going to drown. So we had constant safety briefs. Anyway, we were down there. We were now protected by some of the islands, and the wind I think naturally had dropped a wee bitty, and we were catching a bit of sunshine in the summer sun down there. Here was a welcoming iceberg that had moved about 30 degrees. And if you look just to the right-hand side here at this wee iceberg here, you'll see the security aspects in Antarctica. And there we go. We've got a penguin guarding the place. These are the juvenile penguins, up to about 3 years old, and they were swimming around all over the place. Up to about 3 years old, they basically just go out as youngsters and teenagers and just enjoy themselves in packs. Beyond that, they'll be in the colonies breeding, and we'll see a few pictures of them later on as well. So penguins everywhere. We got down to our first mooring, and this is a place called Enterprise Island. So Enterprise Island, the dock here consists of you can't see it too clearly here from here, but it's a sunken whaling ship. Most of the ship is under the water, and then there's another wee sailing ship moored up on one side of that. So as we go in, we dock on the other side of the whaling ship, and it does make a pretty good natural harbour and a natural dock to get in there. Ollie has one of his first class charts. So this is the chart for Enterprise Island, and it tells him where it is, all the and he was giving us a brief in terms of where we're going. So this is the old sunken whaling ship down the middle. He's saying there's room for 2 vessels. So in fact, the better side, which is more protected, had already been taken. So we would come in on this other side here and dock here. So this is the sort of the reason why you need to go with somebody who knows what's going on. This area is not charted from this perspective at all. You need people who know what's happening. Here's a little zoom into the map. Enterprise Island is here. So we've sailed down the strait here, and we're just going to nip into Enterprise Island in a minute. You'll see in a few minutes, a few slides time, you'll see that we sail across Bancroft Bay, and we dock somewhere around about where we anchor up here, and then we come on board. We get off the island, and we go up Harris Peak, which is just here. So it just gives you a little bit of an idea from a map perspective of where we are. Anyway, first things first. New Year had come and gone when we were sailing the Southern Ocean. When we're out in the big ocean, the boat's dry. So the first things first, we celebrated New Year a little bit late, but better late than never. Next day, we have a shakedown ski on Enterprise Island, especially for those people that were on compromised kit. So just try to work out what we had. As you can see, British Airways hung onto my trousers, which was somewhat inconvenient, but I did have something some Gore-Tex over ones to put on later on. But yeah, it was kind of sometimes to compromise. This was looking down at our boat and the sunken whaling ship. The other vessel had sailed out from the other side, and you can see from this just a little bit more protected from the open sea, being on the other side there. So anyway, a good view of iceberg. So there would be Phil, the six of us who would be skiing. Lena and Ollie would stay on the boat, doing various bits of maintenance, catch up on anything that needed doing. They were also there. They could both ski. So if something did happen, they were sort of an emergency get out of jail free team as well. So anyway, they were on the boat chilling out. So this was just setting off. We roped up as two teams, one team of 4, one team of 3, and the theory is that if the whole team got pulled into something, that the other team would be able to enact a rescue and make sure that we got everybody out okay. And we skied across Enterprise Island and stopped on the other side in a wee cove and a wee little bay there, and we had our lunch. And so that was our first day out. The next day, we sailed the boat across Bancroft Bay and anchored it there, and then we have a little Zodiac which takes us aboard. This was just while I was sitting, putting my skis on, and a penguin pops out of the water, and I thought, putting my boots on, and I thought I may as well take a picture of a penguin while I'm putting my ski boots on. It doesn't happen every day. You can see that the weather now is really bluebird day, really, no wind, absolutely gorgeous. Got ourselves sorted out and started skiing across the plateau there. Phil had adjudicated that we didn't need to rope up for this. The roping up the previous day had been as much for training and just remembering what we were up to. We still took all the ropes with us, and we just headed across the plateau here. This is known ground. Phil's been up here before, knows the way, and there were some big openings in the ice. So another view of it from just above it, but fortunately everything seemed to be visible, and you can now see our route. A little bit of crust breaking through on the surface. That was loosening up as the day went on, but it was kind of nice to skin up on because it was pretty solid. And then, as I say, it loosened up a bit for the descent. So we were just going to skin up through the icefall here, and there's Harris Peak at the top. And we got to the top. Life was good, just over 1,000 meters. And we had a really pleasant ski down, and great views. So that was all. That was great. And got down to the bottom. Ollie spots us coming back, comes over in the Zodiac with some beer, and we sit in the sunshine, having a few beers, getting our boots and things off, getting ready to go back to Iceberg. Went back to Iceberg. And we sailed back to Enterprise Island, docked up on the other side of the sunken whaler this time, so we were a little bit better protected. Ollie was wanting to always, I'm going to use the word, make sure we kept us, we took a conservative approach to things. So we were docked up there, and Liam and Frederick decided it was a good place to have a swim, and they both jumped in. You needed a pretty high-speed camera to get them while they were in the water because they didn't stay in very long for one very good reason that I'll let you work out. Um, so most of them went out for a wee kayak before dinner, and then there were three of us. I think there were three of us, and then Frederick also joined us, who had cooked dinner, and we went out for a kayaks. This was about sort of 10 o'clock at night after dinner, and we went out for a wee kayak. Firstly around the wreck, and then we headed out and just swanned around the islands there. Saw a bit of wildlife. I think that's a chin strap penguin. Saw some more wildlife. And in this picture, you'll see the waves are just starting to get a little bit choppy, a little bit of breaking on the top of them. This was the last picture I took with my camera, because just in a few minutes later, we were turning around this island here. And as we went across the weather, my poor kayaking skills came to play, and I was rolled out of the kayak. It took me about 12 hours to warm up, but unfortunately my camera never survived. So just goes to show you've got to be on the ball all the time. Phil had a full safety system in place to get the kayaks together, because it was quite choppy getting me then back onto their kayaks, and then turn mine over, get the water out of it, and then get me back in to get back to the boat. So that was added to the excitement for the evening. Not something I want to repeat. I can vouch the water was very chilly. Next morning we woke up, and that wee squall that came in had dropped the temperature, brought a bit of snow with it, but more importantly, this is iceberg, and this bit to the side here is the old sunken whaling ship. The other side there is an iceberg that's drifted in. We would, if we'd been docked on the other side, been between that iceberg and the whaling ship. So Ollie's conservative approach by saying let's get on the protective side was really, really important, because we could have been in literally deep water if we hadn't done that. Anyway, as the morning went on, we realized that there was in fact another problem looking out of the back of us. We were planning on sailing away. We'd done everything we wanted to in this area, sail away and head down to start to look at some of the more exciting ski touring. But unfortunately, there was another iceberg that had blown in, and this iceberg was too close to the back of the sunken ship, and we weren't going to be able to get out in deep enough water here. So we were sitting there and going, well, okay, what can we do about it? So we sent out the Zodiac. We tried to push the iceberg past our bow. We tried to push it away. The boat carries these bamboo poles, which you can use to push icebergs away from you. They're really excellent. They just give you enough spring to be able to push them, but they're also reasonably light and strong as well. So we did everything we could to get the iceberg the wrong side of us, or the right side of us, depending which way you're looking at it. So we shoved it with the Zodiac. We tied it up to an old anchor point. We got our rope and we tried pulling it around that way. And sadly, to no avail. We couldn't shift it. And the next morning we went to bed that night. So we lost the day, went to bed that night. And although it looks like it's in a very similar position, it's actually slightly further out to sea. And next morning when we woke up, Ollie reckoned there was enough room to get around the other side of it, which is what he did. And we were able to escape from Enterprise Harbour. And we sailed down to Coulville Island. And Coulville Island is a very popular place for a penguin colony, but our main objective was to go along and do a bit of skiing. So we got ourselves ready in the morning, got all the skis ready. We started going out in the kayak in the Zodiac to get to the landing point. And as we went around the end of a headland, the wind really caught us. We were in big seas, a lot of spray, and everybody looked at each other and realized that going skiing that day was not a good idea. You can still see even now, this is the afternoon, the clouds still a bit claggy. So we turned around and we went sightseeing and checked out the penguins. So this colony here, this is the lower level, but the penguins go all the way up to the top here. And it'll be the ones that have just started getting together and having babies that tend to go at the top. They go for the apartments with the best view, without realizing that actually you've got to come down to the sea and get your fish and have a wash and do all those things. And you're also more exposed to the bad weather. So as they get more experience, they get the prime real estate is actually nearer the sea, and the success rate, you could sense this by looking into the nests and seeing that there were more eggs in the nests lower down. So anyway, I won't bore you too much about penguin etiquette. except the fact they're very, very smelly. And when they go into the sea, they're always very, very mucky. And when they come back out again, this is one going back up, and they push and slide. And he's all clean again because he's had a good wash. Anyway, get back to the boats, and we have a spot of local whiskey. The ice all comes from local ice. So yeah, life was good. If the weather's good, we're hoping to get some serious ski touring. The touring would have taken place by we had camping equipment with us, so we would have the plan was to take the camping equipment, set up a base camp, and then from there go and do the various different peaks. So we had all that kit with us, and the ability to do that. Unfortunately, soon after we got back to the boat, bit of a bombshell. We discovered that, or Ollie said, look, they've been trying to do some work on the boat, and they realised there's a problem with the gearbox on the boat, and forward gear on the boat had become intermittent. So we had another problem on the boat, which we're being kind of made aware of, but it didn't seem to be too much of a problem, which is the anchor on the boat goes up and down with a hydraulic winch. And a hydraulic winch is great because it takes all the stress out of pulling the anchor up, and it controls the lowering of the anchor. But if you ever want to lower the anchor really fast, you let a clutch off and the anchor goes down under just by gravity, so it goes down real fast, which effectively gives you an option of an emergency stop. So the clutch wasn't working, so we didn't really have an emergency stop option on the boat, and now we had a compromised drive going in a forward direction. So we pull out the spare Zodiac, which is a little bit smaller than the other one, and a slightly smaller engine. And we discovered that on the spare Zodiac, it was missing one of these bits of wood that goes along the bottom, so it wasn't really as solid as it should be. Anyway, got the Zodiac inflated, put it in the water. We've now got two Zodiacs that nudge us around, and the plan is to head for a Chilean base that might have they hopefully would have had some engineers that might be able to help us out with the gearbox. So let's just back to the map here. Enterprise Island is just off here. We then sailed around the corner here to Culaville Island, which is just here. The Chilean base is here in Paradise Harbour. So we're now going to sail around here to Paradise Harbour. And what the goal is, although there wasn't much wind, Ollie was hoping, he knew that the gearbox would eventually go into gear in forward after several tries. So once he got it in, he was just going to leave it in gear, and that was what we were going to do. He also knew it would work in reverse. Reverse seemed to be more reliable. So we head off around to Paradise Harbour. Again, now one of the other benefits of Paradise Harbour is it's a double harbour. There's one facing north and one facing south with a small spit of land between them. So he was hoping to get into the one that was north facing. And he again came out with his little map, and he says, you know, this is our boat, and then he's got the little Zodiacs, two Zodiacs that you can use to nudge the iceberg to get it into the right position, to get our anchor down, and then get some ropes in to tie us up against the land. So we get there, and it's a lovely place, great place. There's penguins. I don't actually have any pictures. We went for a really nice kayak that night, or that evening, kayaking around some sloughy bits of ice, and yeah, really pleasant. I went to bed that night, having made contact with the Chileans, and we were going to go and catch up with them the next day. Anyway, soon after midnight, I was sound asleep, and I woke to two things fairly simultaneously. One was the sound of ice scraping down the side of the vessel, and the other was the first mate coming down, Lena going, everybody up, all hands on deck, emergency, all hands on deck. And the wind had changed direction and picked up in strength, and the harbour that we were in was now being bombarded by some quite considerable icebergs. So we get the old bamboo poles out, which fortunately we'd had a bit of practice with, although, you know, not in earnest. But now we're having to use these things in earnest to stop the boats being crushed by the ice. And Ollie gets into the Zodiac, Now, the other slight challenge we had was our spare Zodiac. Unfortunately, not only was it missing a bit of wood, it also had a hole in one of the pontoons, and it doesn't take much to work out that that's not a great situation for something that's supposed to float. So that was back in the hold, and we were now had the one Zodiac. We had about 3 or 4 ropes. So this is one of the ropes going back to land. We had 3 or 4 ropes holding us in place with our anchor. So we had to get free of all of these, pull the anchor in, and get ourselves steaming out of where we were and miss all the icebergs. And this was starting to prove to be quite a challenge, because what you didn't want to do is have any of the ropes going around our propellers, because they were intermittent at the best of times, and to, so we had to make sure that we either retrieved the line from the land and rolled it in, or we were going to cut our ropes free, and that was the last thing we wanted to do, was to lose any of our ropes. Anyway, the Chileans spotted us, fortunately, and they're not just they're down there for various reasons, and one is emergency, offering an emergency service, and they have 2 of these big Zodiacs, much more powerful, and they sent out 2 of these big bad boys, and they nudged us free of the ice, moved a bit of ice around, and our Zodiac then took care of collecting our ropes up, which we were then able to cut free of the boat, and eventually we got free of the ice, and we got the boat into forward gear, and we then steamed around in circles, because our Zodiac was now on shore with all the rope and 3 people, and we were on the boat with the rest of us, steaming around wondering what to do. Fortunately, the Chileans went into the other harbour, and most of the ice had blown out of that because the wind had changed, and they cleared that so that we could get into the harbour on the other side of the Chilean base. The iceberg right behind us that you see in the picture, that was grounded, so that wasn't a problem to us. And we then retrieved all our rope and retrieved our crew, and we were all sitting in the boat, a little bit tired, a little bit shaken, but everything was in, we were all in one piece, which is great news. So that afternoon, the Chileans informed us that we were invited to a birthday party. So I think Phil rapidly baked a birthday cake, as one does, went on board. That's looking back at where iceberg is in the harbour. And as you can see, it's pretty free of ice, which is good. Anywhere, any of these bases, anybody who lives down there, they're just surrounded by penguins, all of them with their nests. And there's the boy with his having his birthday party. So we got a cake, they had made a cake, and we had a fine afternoon, and so we met some really great people, and we met the guys who came out to save us the night before. So the boy in the middle is the station commander, and the guy on the left there was the medic, who was particularly happy that he really didn't have any work to do, because he did figure at one point he probably would have some work to do the previous night. And then there's myself, Rodney, and Paul. So went back, and the next day we're now stuck in the harbour. The Chileans really aren't able to help, because while they've got a mechanic there, we had a hydraulic gearbox that was going to need some specific bits changing in it or dealing with it, and Ollie had changed out the oil, and the oil had come out looking completely the wrong color, so we figured the gearbox was pretty much goosed, and it was only going to go in one direction, which would steadily get worse and worse. So Ollie's now thinking, a little bit how are we going to get back, but we're safe there for at least a day. So we got the kayaks, and we went out for an all-day kayak. We headed off with a bunch of hot chocolates, bunch of sandwiches, and went for a couple of hours, and Phil knew a little island that we could kayak to, and it was a really atmospheric day. On the way back, we bumped into some humpback whales, not literally, but there's a couple of humpbacks there. We saw other wildlife, got up real close, and in the evening, another small yacht had joined us in the harbour, and the Chileans did what they do best, or one thing they do really well, which is, other than saving people who are in trouble, but they throw a big barbecue. I can say at least one of our people were vegetarians, and if you're a vegetarian and you go to a Chilean barbecue, you're going to go hungry. You're not going to go short of alcohol, though. So we had a fine evening there. So we've now sailed from Enterprise down to Coolerville, down to we're now in just the north part of Paradise Harbour here. And the decision is made now that what we should do is we should seek, there's a safer harbour round at Port Lockroy, which is here. And Port Lockroy, some of you may know, it's the British base down there, one of the British bases down there, and it's where the most southerly post office in the world is. So we're now going to aim to get out of here, come round the corner, go up this canal here, and then into Paradise Harbour. So we get a little bit of a better view of Paradise Harbour, and you can see we're going to be tucked in here. And the benefit of this now is that the harbour is really well protected, and any wind that was blowing from this direction is going to be, the ice is very unlikely to get around here and into the harbour. So the harbour is, nothing's guaranteed down in Antarctica, but the harbour's pretty much ice free. So we thought this is a good place to take stock and see what our next best move is. The other thing is, while we're in there, we can take kayaks and we can easily get onto the land here. And there's Jabbat Peak, and then over to Dormer Island, to Dormer Hill and Stokes Hill. So there's options of doing a few things other than just staying on the boat, which is also considered important. I think it's also worth saying at this point that without the gearbox on the yacht, we had to abandon the original schedule of getting up any unclimbed peaks, which would mean anchoring the boat somewhere, fairly a little bit more precarious, you need good precision and you need everything on the boat to be working. So the original objectives of the trip now are gone. The secondary objectives are to enjoy ourselves as best as we can, given the circumstances, and then look for a suitable weather window to sail north. So when we sailed south, you've got the engine on the boat, so you'd set the sail so that in the sort of the lull bits of the wind, you can just pop a bit of engine on there and supplement that and keep a good speed. If you get into doldrums, you can use the engine to get yourself out of them. And then if the wind is really blowing to the maximum, you've got your sail up, you don't need the engine at all. If the wind really blows, you'd have to take a bit of sail down. So you could use the engine to give yourself a lot of flexibility around the weather. When we're going back north again, the first problem is you need the engine ideally to maneuver close to land to make sure that you don't hit the land. We're a 40-ton boat, and you need quite a lot of power to make sure that you can get that going in the right place. And that was, but once we got out into the open sea, you could sense Ollie was just really looking forward to sailing the boat across the ocean there. You're not actually allowed to leave Ushuaia in any kind of vessel without a working engine. So the idea of being stuck anywhere with sail only is just doesn't happen. Even around the world yacht races and things, all those vessels have got engines on board, but they've got seals on them, so they're only used in an emergency. So we were kind of in an interesting position, a little bit of uncharted territory here. Anyway, that just gives you a little bit of an idea in terms of where we are. So the next day we took the Zodiacs, docked and climbed Jabbat Peak. Jabbat Peak was pretty well skiable all the way except the last 50 meters where we hoofed up with crampons and got a great team photo at the top there. A little bit misty, but it was good to get out on skis and good to go and do something around what we were hoping to achieve. On the way down, we stopped at the Dame hut. The Dame hut was one of the very first huts built by the British, and it was actually built on a flat bit of glacier and used as an emergency stopover, or a stopover for any flights that were heading south. So what they would do is they would fly south, they would get here, they would then know that there was a safe place, and these guys could radio back saying, yes, weather's good enough to land, and then they would wait there until the weather was good enough to carry on going south. So it's an important part of the early exploration by the Brits. It's been used for all sorts of purposes since, scientific purposes, and Phil there, who's sitting at the front of the table there, he's spent a whole season in this hut when it was still an operational hut, so he was able to give us some really great stories around the place. It's now purely a museum. In fact, when we got there, there were a lot of tourists. There's some big tourist boats go down there, and they come on board, and they're only allowed to walk along a narrow track, and they walk across the glacier, something that's been marked out for them. And they got to the hut, and when we skied down to the hut, we kind of became a little bit of a tourist attraction ourselves as we arrived at the hut, and there were all the tourists taking pictures of us and having a chat with us. That was kind of yeah, interesting, fun, depending which way you look at it. So anyway, yeah, a bit of history going on, which was good. The next day we went over to Dormer Island, and we went up Dormer Peak first. Had some interesting snow conditions coming down. It was breakable crust, and some of the others described it as the worst snow they'd ever skied on in their life. Those of you that know me know I live in Scotland, and yeah, we get powder, but we also get something that is worse than the worst snow that these guys had ever skied on in their life. So I actually thought it was kind of good fun. But anyway, a bit of difference of opinion. So we had some crusty conditions. That was fine. Anyway, then we decided to climb up Stokes Hill, which involved a hoof along this ridge. And as we were climbing up, I think it was in fact just before this picture was taken, Phil pointed out that there were humpback whales going down the channel here. So we were kind of hoofing up this ridge, and there were humpback whales blowing steam just below us. A pretty surreal experience, and the fact that you could hear them, it was very atmospheric and very memorable indeed. And the ski off Stokes Hill was also memorable because we did set off a bit of an interesting sloughy avalanche as well. But luckily, none of us were in it. The next day, we became tourists big time, and we went to Port Lockroy. This is the sort of the later British scientific base, and it was on the telly earlier in the year. Sorry, previous year, when they were talking about the 4 ladies who were staffing it over the season, and there was a bit on the BBC about it. So it was kind of interesting meeting them, going to the most southern post office in the world. And yes, I did post a postcard back to my wife and my mother. Have to do these important things. It was also they're trying to maintain the place, preserve it as it was. And they've got a bit of a predicament between preserving it, maintaining it, but then they discovered that paint was chipping off some of the walls here. And under the paint, they found other paintings that the people who were living there had painted in previous years, and then these have been painted over. So they've got a bit of a predicament in terms of how much should they try and delve into the depths and the history of the place, and how much to preserve what there is there now. Anyway, it was a really interesting day, really interesting trip, and I'm really glad that we did it. And it was kind of there weren't very many people there, because the yachts tend to go around lunchtime, so we were the only people there. Really quiet. This was the kitchen. And I think there were about 7 or 8 people staffed the place, and every week they do 1 week around. You'd be on kitchen duty, and you can't see it too well because the color isn't too good. But if you look to the left, there's all sorts of things. There's jars of Marmite, powdered mustard. Everything's powdered and tinned, and all your food would have been powdered and tinned. And the only way to get fresh meat or anything would be to look out of the window at these chaps here. And I was just standing there thinking, yeah, if I'm the cook here, and I'm thinking, yeah, let's get some fresh meat here. Well, this chap here, he looks like he's probably big enough to feed us all. And you go along and you pick your animal. So I'm sure they did do that. Just for clarification, today you're not allowed to eat the penguins, and no, we didn't. So anyway, but I'm sure they did then. Anyway, the weather window to return was still looking at least 3 days away. We were sitting there with all our camping kits, all our ski kits still. So we said, let's just take all the camping kit, all our dry bag, all the pool bags, and let's go ashore and have a couple of nights on the glacier. So that's what we did. And there's Phil standing there looking very happy because he's doing something that we really were planning to do. So we tow most of the weight behind us, and then carry a few things on the rucksack. So there we are. We're climbing out of the harbour. There's Port Lockroy's there. That's where the base is. The weird thing is, there's a little island just in the entrance to the harbour. This is the harbour, all this area in the near ground, and the 4 girls who were there looking after the post office are stuck there for about 3 to 4 months, and they weren't given any kind of zodiac or anything to to get off the island. So they were stuck on that island for the whole time. The only time they'd ever get off was some of the bigger boats weren't allowed to disembark their people, so that the girls on the island would go to the boats and take their souvenirs and give them a talk and do that sort of thing. So when they got to the boat, they could have a shower. They would sometimes get a decent meal. But other than that, they were stuck on that island for for about 3 or 4 months. So it was kind of must have been a fairly restrictive existence. But anyway, they were really happy and obviously really enjoying what they were doing. They were a mixture of dealing with the tourists, looking after the history of the island, but they were also doing scientific work. There was a couple of them there who were specialists in looking after or studying the penguins, and they'd split the island in half, where there was one half where nobody was allowed to go except the two people who were trained, and the other half where the tourists were, and they were comparing how the penguins were doing from one side to the other, and apparently it makes very little difference with all the tourists being there, which was a positive note. Anyway, off we set with our bags, and we set up camp. Fine view of Dormer Island there, as Dormer Hill, and that's Stokes Hill. And this is you can just see the slope that avalanched a couple of days earlier. So yeah, we set the tents up, and 3 tents, built a kazi, big nice high wall, and yeah, it was kind of nice not to be sleeping on a moving surface. Woke up the next morning and it was a bit snowy, so we skinned across the glacier. Would have done better off on Nordic kit, but we didn't. So we skinned across the glacier. We spent a bit of time in Phil had the shelter where we could have our lunch, and then we returned. And on our return, Phil pointed out that up this couloir here was the skin track, just the other side of this, the top of this, a skin track up Jabbat Peak. So if we climbed up this, we could then go up Jabbat Peak again and then have a nice ski down. So this was quite appealing, but you'll probably notice there's a big crack across the ice here, which we knew we would have to get across. And when we got up to it, there were 2 problems. The first problem was the gap wasn't huge, but the snow on the other side of it was totally unconsolidated and just a sheet of ice. But the other problem we had was the weather had turned and we had 0 visibility. So we were now going to try and cross a crack in 0 visibility on very sketchy snow in a fairly inaccessible place. So we decided the best thing was just to return back to our tents. So we returned back to the tents. I had a really great night's sleep. Woke up in the morning and a fairly significant storm had blown in. And so we literally had to pretty much dig our way out of the tent in the morning. And we decided the best thing was to retreat. It really was pretty ferocious and trying to blow the tents down. The kazi survived. The one drawback with the kazi was that we hadn't made it operational in all wind directions. So it was a fairly unpleasant experience to go and use it because the wall was on the wrong side. But anyway, there you go. You can't have everything. And we returned to the boat. Weather was still not suitable to sail home, so we did a bit more penguin sightseeing, and we saw a semi-albino penguin. We saw the remnants of the whaling trade that was down there. It's a reality, sad, but it happened. Glad it stopped, or largely stopped. And we saw an Adelie penguin. So most of the ones you saw there were rock hoppers. No, they weren't. I've forgotten what they are now. I'll remember what they are. If not, Rodney will remind me in a minute.
Gen 2 penguins.
Yes, sir. Most of them are Gen 2s. 99% of them are Gen 2s. We saw a chin strap earlier on, then we saw an Adelie, and those are the 3 most likely ones you're going to see on the peninsula. Thanks, Rodney. And on this little stop, this is another little example of the sort of way we'd pulled our Zodiac into this little bay, and when we'd come in here, this was ice-free. We'd been on land for probably an hour, and in that time, all this ice had built up. So then we had to get the Zodiac out through the ice to get us back to the boat. And it just goes to show that down in Antarctica, things change very fast, and you're constantly being caught out by all sorts of challenges. So anyway, got back, and the next day it was suitable to return. So Ollie knew the skippers of some of the other vessels down there, and there was a French vessel called Port Orange, and they had agreed that they would kind of shadow us back. So they would get us out, help us get out of the Port Lockroy harbour, and then we would regroup at the end of the Beagle Channel, which is about best part of a day's steam, because the Beagle Channel is quite narrow in places, runs east-west, and if depending on the wind direction, you could either be blown into you either can't make any headway, or you're going to be blown into Argentina or Chile. So we were hoping to get a tow, or the plan was to get a tow down down the channel as well. Anyway, so we got going, and the blue curve, this is the map of the harbour, the blue curve was us trying to tack out under our own sail. And if you look at each tack, they were getting smaller and smaller. We're making less and less headway, and then eventually we lost it and had to come back in. And we spent about the next hour and a half getting to the point where Port Orange could come past us with his engine, throw a rope over, and then, so this was us, the pink curve is then us messing around in the harbour, and eventually we got the rope thrown over, and then he towed us out into the open sea. So we're now being towed out a couple of hours out of where we started, and we're now battening down our final hatches, and shortly afterwards we cut ourselves free of Port Orange, and now we're under sail only to get across. So instead of, normally you would just use a bit of sail and a bit of engine, but as it was, we had to keep tacking backwards and forwards to make headway to get out into the ocean. And there's Ollie at the. You can drive the boat fully from outside. I think that was more appropriate if you're in the Mediterranean. Anyway, he did spend a couple of hours doing that before coming inside. Yeah, off we go. They even let me drive it occasionally. They decided the boat was broken enough for that. And yeah, so what we found was under sail, you're being thrown around a bit more because you've got to set the sail a little bit higher. So the stresses on the boat were all a little bit higher all the way around, because it's the only way we can move forward. And after a couple of days in fairly strong weather, that main sail rope that I was talking about that controls the boom that comes out the back here and sets the angle of that snapped. We're now adrift in the Southern Ocean with no drive at all, floating around. Fortunately, the winds had abated a little bit, and fortunately the boat was set up to have a spare mainsail that could be transferred over, but it did involve Ollie climbing out along here, and Lena. I think the two of them knew roughly what they were doing, and they got us sorted again. So we got underway eventually, and we got caught in a bit of a sort of doldrum area, but we got some great sunrises and sunsets. And here's another brief video of the sailing back. You can hear the boat creaking a lot more. Well, that's the bread maker. Most important bit of kit on the boat most of the time. And that's a sail up full. That's what's left of our bamboo poles. And then when the weather got a bit rougher, Ollie had the prime job of going out the front and putting the sail up and pulling it down, because we were moving the sail up and down a lot more, because we couldn't use the engine to compensate for when the winds dropped. So yeah, not an ideal. Not an ideal job. Anyway, we got down. This is us going down the Beagle Channel. These are albatrosses. People who tell you albatrosses never land, they're giving you porkies. We had a mighty fine return up the Beagle Channel. There's a bit of reality actually, because when we got to the end of the Beagle Channel, we were supposed to meet up with Port Orange, but because they hadn't had their main sail break, which cost us a few hours, and they didn't have to do any tacking, they got there nearly a day before us. Unfortunately, they had an incident on the way back where one of their people managed to fall out of the toilet, and he landed on the toilet on the other side of the boat, so rolled all the way across the boat. Obviously not a happy chap, and they were concerned. They thought he had broken 2 ribs. And so they essentially had to bail out of helping us and get him back to dry land as quickly as possible and back to a hospital. So we were now on our own going down the Beagle Channel. We had to wait an extra day at the end for any kind of favorable winds, because when we got there we had a headwind all the way, and there's no way we were going to make into a headwind in the boat. So we waited until the wind blew from the north, which meant it was blowing us away from Argentina and towards Chile all the time. And eventually we started making good headway down the channel. Lena's leaning over the boat there and pulling kelp off our rudders, because what we were finding was there's a lot more kelp now, and this is her retrieving it, and we're throwing it over the back. Our speed would go up from about sort of maybe 4 or 5 knots up to 6 to 8 knots when you take all the kelp off the rudders. So that was an important job, had to be done. And so, yeah, a lot of wildlife going down the Beagle Channel. In fact, it was kind of, from a wildlife point of view, they were kind of almost like welcoming us back again. It was real special. Saw a lot of whales as well. So that was kind of good. Anyway, the winds were getting stronger and then they were getting weaker. And this was a point where we started getting blown towards Chile, because the wind was generally from the north, but it wasn't, at this point, it wasn't strong enough to really give us any forward power. So we were being blown towards Chile. So we got our Zodiac out for the crossing. Everything was battened down. The Zodiac got deflated, so we got that out again to help push us back away from Chile. And then literally 10 minutes later, a squall would have blown up, and now we're back under sail, and we could be going like the clappers towards Ushuaia. So it was a real stop-start final journey. We then had one final thing to think about, which was, so this was our sort of the last bit down the Beagle Channel, and you can see we were doing a bit of tacking under sail. But we knew that like the last 100 meters were going to be a real problem, because we've got no low speed maneuvering. We had one Zodiac. So the plan was just to go into the harbor, throw the anchor down, get ourselves anchored, and then we were at least safe in the harbor. But in fact, the harbour authority came up with another plan. They had a spare Zodiac, so they could send that out to help us come in. And then they cleared one side of the harbour. So Ollie then gave everybody a job to do, which was to get the rubber buoys over the side, throw ropes over, drive the Zodiacs. And he had the whole thing right down to an absolute fine art. And he brought the Iceberg, 40 tons of vessel, into the harbour, and a lot of people were aware of our predicament. The harbour was pretty well stacked with people, so it was a good grandstand view a lot of people had. And he just brought that thing, there's the Iceberg there, into this fairly rickety old wooden harbour, absolutely inch perfect, to finish the journey off. So he really was a masterful skipper of the boat, under sail especially. Without him, I think we'd have been in a lot more trouble. Anyway, we got back. That night we threw a barbecue, because the other problem we had was that the freezer on the boat had stopped working. That was fine when we were down in Antarctica, because we could fill it up with local ice. On the journey back, everything was starting to melt, so we had quite a lot of meat and food there. And so that evening we threw a bit of barbecue for everybody else who had helped us in the harbour. The Pod Orange crew were okay. The guy that thought he had broken ribs didn't have broken ribs, and we had a good party that night. And we had a good time, which was great, and we were all back. So if we go back to the objectives, yeah, we first 3 no problem. Sadly, the big objective we failed miserably. That's just life. You're in a very unforgiving location on a vessel that had a few problems, and I think the problems stemmed back to COVID. It had missed a refit, and I think the person that owned the boat was just trying to maybe push the luck with one extra season out of it before the refit. They hadn't had any revenue for a few years. Anyway, whatever the reasons are, we failed here. We did a lot of kayaking. We saw a lot of wildlife. I had a wonderful time, and I wouldn't say I'd learned to sail, but I know a lot more about sailing than I did before. If you ask me, would I do the trip? If I'd known what was going to happen, I probably would have said, no, I'm not going to do it. Having done the trip, am I glad I did it? Yes. Did I meet some really great people? Yes. So, huge amount of real good things came out of it. I'm just so glad, with hindsight, I'm glad I was there, glad I did do it. But you just got to bite your lip a little bit about the major objectives. So that's pretty much the end. This is the final slide. So thanks to the Eagle Ski Club who helped promote it, and the Alpine Ski Club who helped promote it and gave us a little bit of a grant, which was nice. And then I've just tucked away in the left-hand corner, I've just plugged my my Grand Paradiso trip, if anybody's interested in that. So I'll let you digest that. So I guess it's time for me to stop and say, has anybody got any questions?
I can see Andy's come through in the chat. Wanting to know about human waste.
Yeah, so human waste. Once we got south of the, if I've got this right, the 61st parallel, we weren't allowed to throw anything over into the ocean. So that included human waste and our food waste. You might have seen some of the pictures of the boat. There was a big blue bucket on the back. So that's where all our food waste went. When we were on Antarctica itself, we could bury stuff because we were a small team. We could bury stuff. So, but what we we didn't have to bring it all back with us, which is possibly where your question is coming from.
Just as a comment there, Steve. You know, as you may know, I work as a tour guide for the big cruise ships, and it's super strict. There's no way that we on a big cruise ship can leave anything on the peninsula at all. So I must say I'm slightly surprised, but I do know that the regulations, or no, sorry, the guidelines, I should say, change as soon as the boats get above a certain size. So that was the purpose of the question, to find out. So basically, when you dug the Kazi, all the human waste stayed on the peninsula. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah, that is correct. Yes, and you'd really probably need to follow up with Phil Wickens there, and he would put you right on the size of the expedition that is allowed to and isn't allowed to leave it. But he kept us right on everything. And yeah. You know, if we north of the 61st parallel, you're eating an apple, the apple core could go over the side.
Oh,
the
no,
minute,
no.
Yeah,
it was primarily concerned with what happens on the continent itself.
We had to take all our other waste with us, so we couldn't leave an apple core, but we could leave human waste.
Okay, right. Okay, thanks. Okay, thank you.
That's all right.
It's Richard Davison here. That was a very interesting talk, Steve. I was just wondering whether the people got reunited with their skis and other equipment at some point on their arrival back in South America.
So yes, we did. We got up to Ushuaia, and the three of us found all our stuff. In fact, Rodney had asked his to be returned to the UK. Paul's and mine were there, but it was quite interesting because when we got there, they said no, there's definitely no skis there. No, we got nothing there. They didn't recognise any of the numbers, but the guy was so friendly, as my experience is all Argentinians are, or all the ones I met, and he just said, "I'll show you into our lost luggage thing," and sure enough, standing in the corner, what are two big long packages? There's our ski bags. So yeah, no, we did get reunited. I know British Airways coughed up for me. I think the other two did get something eventually. It was frustrating.
Steve, do you think there's anything that you could have done up front to have kind of ensured a better outcome? I guess the bottom line is the boat needed that servicing, but it's such a big investment to then not be sure what kind of equipment you're going to be getting.
So this is an interesting question, and we'd actually asked as a group afterwards, you know, should we have done a bit more research? And it turned out that the boat had problems before, but when we got down there and we started asking, we said, "Oh yes, no, it's been repaired by the following people," and they went on about how you know various things had been done and everything was fine on it and there wasn't a problem. So I think if we had done our research and we'd found out a bit more about the history, we would have just been reassured by the owner that, "Oh, don't worry, yes," and she would have said, "Oh, it's been this contractor's done that, this contractor's done this," and would have said, "Fine, this is good, this is looking good," because it turned out it wasn't the first time the gearbox has gone. So yeah.
And how many boats of this type are available for charter to do this kind of thing?
We saw certainly three others. I don't know for sure. I'm guessing there might have been as many as half a dozen.
Mhm.
One thing we had was Phil Wickens as an expert on Antarctica. He spent more days
Mm.
touring down there than possibly anybody else. I believe he advises some of the big tour operators as well, and works with them as well on what can be done on shore. So he's an incredibly experienced. To have him on board was really important. The boat had the two crew who were both skiers themselves and mountaineers, so they could help us. So there were a lot of upsides. It also had the enclosed cabin, which was really nice. Some of the other vessels, you were steering and driving it on your shift, you'd have been outside all the time. So it did have a lot of advantage. I think it was possibly a little bit too sophisticated. I think sometimes a lot of us the guys who are hut to hut touring and doing some of these things, we often take the approach, let's just keep it as simple as we can. Let's limit the number of things that can go wrong. You might not be as comfortable, but limit the number of things that can go wrong. And I think this vessel was the other side of that. People that know some of the things maybe I've done, my philosophy is go travel light, travel fast, get there, but you don't maybe carry all this backup and all the fancy gizmos. And I think this boat was maybe the opposite of that philosophy.
Yeah, hi Steve. I wondered if you how you felt about the state of the landscape. I looking at some of your pictures, I could see a lot of dirty black remnants of rock and melting and stuff like that, and that seemed quite different from when I was there, although I was there sort of months earlier, basically. So that may have been a factor. But did you see stuff which made you concerned about the effects of climate change on the continent?
So I think the answer is yes, Dave. Now, so for my first time down there, so I'm comparing it with nothing, but I do remember, especially on our camping trip, saying to Phil, all around us we could hear ice crashing in the sea, occasionally see it. And I said to Phil, I said, is it normal that you're hearing all this ice crashing? And Phil just said, no, this is really, occasionally you do, this is really warm. And it was constant on the whole trip that we were hearing that. And it was just generally warmer than it normally is. And so, yeah, there's no question about it. In my mind, from the limited view I had, it is getting warmer down there. Yeah, sadly.
Thanks.
Yeah.